Hello everyone, this is Stefano Ritteri. I'm again with Point Blank. We're in my new studio today. We're gonna show you a typical mix situation of one of my forthcoming songs. It's a remix I've done with a friend, Manuel Music. And we're gonna talk first on how I organize the mixing session. In the second part, we will see how I apply EQ dynamics and corrective effects if I need to use them. And in the third part, we will see how I do automations, and eventually I apply some processing on the master to do a sort of a fake mastering to be able to play the song as soon as possible and to try if it works in the dance floor. So we should listen a bit to the song so you know what we're talking about. This is how the song goes. At the moment, all the levels and EQing and stuff, it's all pretty unbalanced. This is actually how I start. Once I finish the creative process for the record, the first thing I do is I save all the sounds in a new session. So the mixing part becomes a completely different story. So I'm not like, I just start this when I'm sure that the song it's done and I don't need to rearrange it or anything, even though sometimes I use effects or EQs during the process of creating the record, especially if I'm working with someone else and we're sending each other parts or sounds or melodies over the internet. I'd rather like have all the session ready and then treat it as a complete new thing. So in this case, I have all of the sounds that me and Manuel have put together for this remix. And you can see the whole structure is already there, the whole arrangement is there, we're pretty happy with it. So the first thing I would do is I would organize the actual mixing session by creating groups. I do this because it makes my life much easier after in the process, because already applying some processing in the groups of sounds, I can save some CPU or time. For example, if already a group has a good compressor on it, I wouldn't need to put a single compressor on every single channel unless I really have to, and I will do this later in the process. So the first thing I do is I normally create a group for the drums and a group for everything else, and which I name sound. So these two groups contain all the separate tracks. Normally, depending on the song, but normally I leave the bass out of all the other groups unless I have more than one bass going on. So in that case, I would create another group just for the 2 or 3 bass tracks that I need. But in this case, there is only a sub, which I consider part of the drums, and the actual bass line stays by itself. So it's not in any group, it's rooted straight in the stereo out. Whereas all the other tracks that you see here are rooted into 2 groups, drums and sounds. Once I do this, once every single track it's in there, I normally apply straight away some processing on the groups. Pretty much is always the same. What you see here is the drum group, and this is the channel strips for the drum group. And the first thing that it's in there is a simulation of a mixer console, which I actually use in every mix I do, and I tend to put after the song is finished again, because you need to open one instance of these effects per channel. So especially if the song is it's a very busy arrangement and I have many sounds, then it will take quite a lot of CPU processing. So I try to do it later when the song is finished, and I know that I'm not going to need another plugin or 2 for the actual songwriting. So this is the Slate digital virtual channel that you see here, and it's open in every single track, and it's open also in the groups and in the effects and on the master bus. What it does, it's an emulation of a mixer console, and I find that it makes my life much easier in terms of mixing, because it emulates not only the characteristic of the preamps of such consoles, but also the crosstalk. So it makes the channels a bit less precise, and it makes some sound leak in other, like it really emulates what a console does, which is not only a bunch of faders and knobs, but it's also the sound somehow leaks in certain channels, and the panning becomes a bit easier when I use this. And generally speaking, it adds a proper sound to the mix. The cool thing is that it emulates different kind of consoles, so you can experiment with the different types, and it really sounds very different from one console to the other. So what you can do is you open all the different plugins on the different channels, and then by grouping them, moving the master one, you can move all of the settings for all of the different channels. Therefore you can choose to use an SSL or an API or a Neve or a Trident or a tube console. And by changing them, the actual sound changes a lot. For example, if you go to Neve emulation, the subs get really big. Sometimes a bit too much. The SSL is fairly clean. My favorite is the API, the USA. So I try to mix with the API always on. So as you see, it's the first plugin on all of my channels and the master bus as well. So also in this group of drums. It's followed by the UAD Fatso, which I really like on the drums. It's a fairly aggressive compressor and tape simulation. And normally my settings, the settings I use in the drum bus are the same that I use on my master bus, as we will see later. What I like to use is a fairly slow attack of 30 milliseconds and a very quick release. In that way, my drums make it pump. When I set it up properly with the threshold, you can see that it makes it pump, which means it works really fast, and it creates, having the attack fairly slow, it allows my transient to go through. Therefore, like the snappy sounds of the claps or the kicks is coming through the compressor, and everything else gets compressed really quick. And another thing I really like about the Fatso is that it has this filter part, which means I can select that below 120 Hertz, the compressor wouldn't work. And this is fundamental for drums because the kick and some part of the snare are hitting in that medium low range. Therefore, that would make the compressor really go crazy. But by putting the filter that the Fatso has and lots of other compressors have now, you basically avoid this pumping on the low frequency, so you let it pass, which is fundamental for the kick. And after this, there is a pull tech again on UAD pull tech, and all it does really, it doesn't boost anything. I just like the fact that the pull tech adds a little bit of dirt, if you want, to the sound, because it's an emulation of a very famous pull tech tube EQ. So all I do actually with it's attenuate, so take off high frequencies, because I find that using machine or whatever I use to make my drums, or generally my sounds, adds, the digital samples has lots of high frequency content, which I don't particularly like too much. And already I know that when the track will be mastered, normally mastering engineers add a little bit of high frequencies, so I try to shave them off with a very gentle filter, and the pull tech is very gentle in that. So as you can see, it has a 3 dB attenuation on the 20 kilohertz, so I can take off a bit of high frequencies, which normally are in the hi-hats and stuff. Okay, so after I create the drum group and I route everything to it, I create the other group. I just call it sound, and what it is just a collection of everything else, synth lines and whatever effects and stuff, and pretty much has the same. What it has again the Slate digital, because this has to be open in every channel in order to work and to create this magic console effects. And then what I have is just a simple EQ from Cubase that just takes off pretty much the low end, just because I know that everything that I will have in this group will not have to be in such a low frequency range. So I just apply it on the group, and then I will apply it also singularly. But as I said, it saves me time sometimes just to open it on the group. So it's just a very simple EQ taking off, the bass. And then after that, there is another UAD favorite of mine is the 1176 compressor. And this is just set to a fairly medium attack and quick release, pretty much like the Fatso. And this, is just to make sure that I don't have peaks on the sounds. And this sort of creates, applying an EQ, a compressor on the group means that already the sounds which are going to be a bit in the background are going to sound a bit better and a bit more present already, because they are compressed. And then if I will need more push, I will go in the separate channels and add more compression or limiting to them. So, and this is my sound. And then, as I said, there is the bass that stays by itself. Then what else do we have? After I set up the groups and I route everything to them, I try to put, I put stuff on the master bus. I try to be very delicate on the master bus, because I know that this is more the job of a mastering engineer. Therefore, all I have, it's again the master section of the Slate digital plugin, where you can decide what console emulation use, if you want to have a bit of drive in the whole group or whatever you need to set up for all the other plugins. And then I have a bus compressor I tend to change this quite a lot depending on the project. In this project particularly, I have another UAD one, is the Precision Bass Compressor, and I like it very much because it's very, very clean. You can't really hear it working, and all it does is it has the same settings as I showed you before, the Fatso, so 30 milliseconds, a very quick release, and a filter, so it wouldn't work on low frequencies. And all it does is it really compresses 1 or 2 dBs, and again, it's more as a safety and as a glue, as a glue option. So it makes me, safe that I don't have peaks that will go into the red when I'm mixing. And generally having a compressor from the beginning of the mix creates this sort of glue factor together with the mix, the mix simulation from Slate Digital. After that, again, a Pultec, pretty much it's the same thing. It has just an attenuation on the high frequencies, so it's pretty much the same as the drum bass. And then I have this plugin, which is a tape simulation, which I recently started to use and I find really, really nice. And all it does, it just creates a bit of distortion. And normally I leave it to a pretty bland setting at the beginning of the mix. And then when everything is mixed, I try to drive it hard up to a point where I hear it working, I hear the distortion, and then I put it a bit back. But this also creates that effects of an old tape and tends to smooth a bit the transients and generally to create a pleasant old school sound, which I really like. So this is open from the beginning with as you see, a fairly simple setup. And then later on in the mix, I would drive it a bit harder to hear it work a bit more. So that's it. That's the first part. It's pretty much this is setting the mix up and opening all the sounds, listen to them together and noticing straight away what doesn't work, like what is too loud, I try to open them together at the beginning so I won't have, two solo sounds, and I have a quick idea of how the song is gonna sound, and then I will start applying the separate EQs and compression to every single channel and the processing I will need for the mix. End of part 1.